Hi there, Mr. Finley here. This is a quick video on the lights here in the space at the black box at RTHS. As you can see right now, these are our stage lights. They are on. It looks a little bit different than when you usually come into the room. Usually in the room we have our fluorescents on. There's two sets of fluorescents. There are fluorescents over here on stage. These are our work lights. There are also fluorescents over the audience. Those are called the house lights. Those are on as the audience comes in, and we turn them off as the show starts. That's controlled by the booth. These stage lights are sort of the pride and joy of RTHS because they are LED lights. That means they were quite expensive. We raised a lot of money to get them. So over time, they'll pay for themselves. They can also be any color. That's the big value to them. So we use a lot of color in shows here because typically you'd have to change the instrument every time you want to change color. We can do that via computer. So we've got blues there, we've got ambers there. We can change those around every cue if we want to. They don't burn hot as most stage lights do. So even though we have a relatively low grid here at 11 feet, this room does not turn into an oven as it would if we were using regular incandescent lights that close to the audience because these are LED lights. So this is a video to show you how we set them up. Notice that there are lights all over the place. So this is one of our two Source 4 ETC, actually it's ETC Source 4, what we call a luster, which is an LED light. We have two of these. They're very powerful. There are key and our fill lights, which are hung over the audience facing toward the stage. They are basically our front light. They are LEDs, so they are capable of being any color. We usually have them just set to amber because that's the best color for lighting human faces. But they can be any color for various effects and that sort of thing. They're quite expensive for that reason. They are $2,500 a piece. But they are ellipsoidals, which means that they give us a contained beam of high power. Notice there that little blue connector, that is a power lock cable. When we talk about cabling them up, that is your power cable that goes in there. And you can also see in that shot the two cables right next to that. It looks sort of like mic cables. Those are DMX cables. Those are the control cables. So every instrument on the grid needs to have two connections. One of them is the power connection, which is one of those, typically in most instruments, it's one of those blue power lock cables, and the other is the DMX connection. The power cables can either come from another instrument, you can daisy chain power together, or they can come from one of the 3-pin power sockets on the grid. We'll show you that as well. The DMX cables need to be daisy chained. That is to say, every single instrument needs to be connected to the previous instrument and then connected to the board. We'll show you those as well. This is just a quick shot from stage of what those two ETC Source 4s look like when you're standing on stage. Notice on the left we've got our key light and then our fill coming in on a little less than 40-degree angle there on the right. They're quite bright when you're on stage, which is the point. If they weren't bright, the audience wouldn't be able to see what was going on. So notice this instrument looks a little bit like the ETC Source 4s, the lusters that we have that are key and fill light, but notice it's a little bit skinnier, a little bit lighter. This is a traditional ellipsoidal. We use these as spotlights because as a traditional instrument, it is not an LED, so it gets very, very hot. Like the other ellipsoidals, it produces a tight and focused beam, and you can adjust that beam by adjusting that barrel you see there on the front. So we use these as spotlights if we need to have a very defined area in a very certain location that is only up for part of the time. We can't leave this on and running for the whole show. The space will get very hot and it can actually burn out as well. So you'll see two things in this shot. The first of them is the dimmer pack that I just mentioned. Those traditional ellipsoidals cannot dim on their own like the LED lights can, so we have a pack like this, a little square thing, that controls the dimmer. Those are plugged directly into a power source, and then the DMX control cables goes in and out of there, and we control that. We call it a desk channel when we are programming it. It has to be set up with the correct address, so I'll do a tutorial in class about that because it's a little bit tricky, but those boxes are how we control the practical lights if, for example, we have a lamp on stage, or we have a street light, or if we're using those traditional ellipsoidals. Also here you can see one of our 6-pars. These are called 6-pars or par cans. They are LED instruments that we use for area light. Oftentimes we use this for headlight rather than the key and the fill, or if we need to light a specific area. Notice there is that film of plastic over it. This is what we call diffusion gel. We use this in all of our instruments typically. Diffusion gel is just a transparent plastic that scatters the light so it looks more natural. It covers a wider area. It doesn't seem quite so tight and focused like a spotlight would. We wouldn't use diffusion gel on a spotlight if we were trying for that effect, but generally if you're just trying to get an area of light, you're going to use that diffusion gel. So the question then, we have all these lights, they're hooked up, how are they controlled? We control them via a laptop and a piece of software called Hog4PC. Typically we use this specific laptop. It's the Lenovo, it has the Apple sticker on it. It's old and it's awful, but it plays nicely. We found that Windows 10 machines do not always play nicely with our lights, so we still use this one old one to control them. There are a series of videos I've already made about how you use the software. As you can see, it's pretty complicated. Once you get used to it, it is not nearly as complicated as it looks, but it does take some training. So I made 4 videos about how you use this. But once you have programmed your cues and all that, how do you get this laptop to control those lights? Well, you have a USB connection to this little box. This is what we call the widget. The Hog DMX widget, the USB comes in this side, and then DMX runs out here. This DMX cable is connected directly to the first light, and then as we showed you in that first shot, another DMX comes out of that light into the next light, and then the next, and they are just daisy chained together. Every light has a DMX in and a DMX out. So that's going to be one of the big challenges whenever you are hanging lights for a show. First you have to take everything off the grid, except usually our key and fill lights stay the same. And then hang them where they're going, and then you have to daisy chain the DMX cables together so that there is a path from this box to each light in order, including the dimmer pack, which controls any of those practical lights. Once you have connected the DMX cables, then you need to make sure that every instrument has power. There's a couple ways that they can get power. Power can come daisy chained from a previous LED instrument, so the power lock cables, there's a power lock in and a power lock out, just as there's a DMX in and out for each one. So you can have a power lock cable that goes from one instrument to the next instrument and they draw power, or you can have a power lock cable that goes directly into one of the 3-pin outlets on the grid. We'll show you those in a moment. The problem is 3-pin and power lock do not go directly together. So typically you have to have 3-pin to what's called an Edison adapter into power lock. I'll show you those in just a second. But every light not only needs to be hooked up to DMX, it also needs to be hooked up to power in some way. So that's the hang, and that's the cabling. The last thing is the addressing, which we'll make a second video about that because it's a little bit more complicated. But then all of your lights should talk to the machine, and the machine should be able to control them.
Are you ready?
So these are standard Edison plugs. You recognize them as your standard wall sockets. This is what our LED lights actually run off of. You just plug them in like you plug in anything into the wall. However, most of the outlets on the grid don't look like that. Most of the outlets on the grid are what we call stage pin or 3-pin. They sort of look like that, so 3 holes in a row. Bring that in focus. So if you're plugging an LED light in, or a dimmer pack, which also uses an Edison plug, you have to use an adapter that goes from those 3-pin plugs to a standard Edison outlet. So when you plug in an LED light into an Edison socket, you have a cable like this. One of them is a standard Edison plug like you're used to seeing. The other is a power lock cable. The power lock inserts and twists, and then it locks with this little yellow tab. When you unlock it, you pull the tab back, twist it, unlock it. So that's how you connect an LED light directly to an Edison power source. More frequently though, you're going to be connecting LED lights to each other. So you'll use a cable like this. They're just the exact same sort of power lock cables, it's that they have a power lock on both ends. One goes into one light that's receiving power, one goes into the next light, into the end, it goes into the out of the one receiving power, and into the in of the one that needs power, and then you're chaining power through. You couldn't do that with a regular instrument because the wattage is wrong, but LED lights draw so little power for their illumination, you can daisy chain them together. So that's something we do a lot of. So this has been a quick video just to give you an overview of the idea of the different types of lights we have and how to hang and cable them. It's a complicated process, as you probably have noticed, so we'll do a lot of hands-on work with this in class, but this at least gives you the vocabulary and a basic understanding.